Welcome. Thank you so much for coming out here today. It's so wonderful to see so many familiar and new faces every month because I've noticed that a lot of you have shown up consistently, and that makes me really happy. But at the same time, we're also looking forward to seeing new people come, and yeah, it's really wonderful to see that. We started this monthly program with the idea of not only patients from our MS center, but the wider MS community to come here and come together, learn from our cohort of medical professionals, educators, and yeah, I'm really excited to present to you the person we have here today. So we are joined by Jen Smrtka, who is a board-certified adult nurse practitioner and multiple sclerosis nurse. She has over 22 years of clinical and industry experience in multiple sclerosis and neuroimmunology. She transitioned from her academic medical practice in MS for 15 years to medical affairs and research in the pharmaceutical industry over 8 years ago. She served as faculty in the schools of medicine and nursing at UNC Chapel Hill, Columbia University, and the University of Miami. Jen was recently certified as a neuroscience and positive psychology health coach, and in her personal time has taken on clients working with them to obtain health, wellness, and mindfulness despite having neurological conditions. She works with clients from an interpersonal neurobiology practice to leverage and transmute challenges to gain perspective and build resilience. In this talk, you will learn about integration of mind and body wellness from a neuroscientific perspective and gain better insights on how we can build resilience and foster wellness in our daily lives. The presentation will conclude with a Q&A session, so please hold all questions until the end. And thank you.
Afternoon. Thank you for having me. Can I speak up better? Okay. I have a very low voice. My father... Okay, good. Well, my father told me once in church, honey, it's okay if you lip sync. God knows what your intention is. So I think I've had a low voice since then. But I'm really excited to be here. And thank you, Dr. Paramel, for the invitation. Appreciate you. I appreciate that you have such an investment in people living with MS and truly understand the privilege and the responsibility it is that as healthcare providers and healers, that it's two experts are always in the room, right? We may have an expertise in the clinical science, but you living in your body, nobody knows your body better than you do. And our expertise relies upon yours. And so to have this type of series here where it's an enrichment and an understanding and a learning, I think is again just reflective of the program here and your commitment to health and wellness.
Shout out to Mira too. She's really done it well. So thank you.
Yeah, Mira, you've been a delightful host and incredibly generous and gracious. So I talked to Mira on Tuesday. I think it was Tuesday. And just to give you some levity for kind of the talk. So I was in Costa Rica over the weekend and just doing the finishing touches on my talk. And on the way home on the plane, I'm opening it up, and my hard drive is wiped, completely gone, everything. So I said to Mira, isn't it the irony of giving a talk on resilience and having to provide it to myself? So I found myself taking some very deep breaths on the plane and doing some meditations and asking the universe to be kind and generous in helping me to locate my files in my hard drive. Needless to say, I on the fly, because I know this subject material, I came up with a renewed, although not necessarily better version, but a renewed version. So today we're going to kind of go into, really it is a culmination of the work I've been doing for the last 30 years in nursing. And the nursing profession, the philosophy of nursing science really is to look at someone holistically and to delve into their pathology, not from a diagnostic perspective, but really to understand so that you can kind of look at systems and the person as a whole. So our physician colleagues are experts in pathology and diagnosis, and we work really closely with, as a nurse practitioner, we work closely with our physician colleagues to help manage. So how do we manage the pathology within the person, and not only the person hosting, and that's a gracious term, hosting a disease in your body, but it affects everybody around you, right? Because we're all connected. So this talk is not meant to be prescriptive. I'm not here in a nurse practitioner capacity. I'm really here as a health coach, which is what I loved about practicing nursing through my career, is really being able to partner with somebody who trusted me to help provide care for them and facility and information, and really to empower you to live your best life despite whatever chaos is going on around us or within us. So really the intention here, I'm going to have to put my glasses on, I can't see my screen. The intention here is really to look at the neuroscience. And it's not, this talk is really agnostic to MS specifically, but I'll draw on my experience to help provide information, but also kind of resonance. But it's really to look at kind of the linkages. What do we know about the brain and how it operates and behaves, and how does that inform our ability to improve our function? And in knowing parts of the brain and how it works and how we're able to regulate through our thoughts, feelings, and ultimately what we execute in our behaviors, how that feedback loop can actually positively help us rewire and improve neural networks, okay? So the idea is really, the intention is to identify ways of accessing our own intrinsic capability of healing, right? And so when we look at resilience, in MS specifically, in an autoimmune disease where we were, when I was coming up through it, it's incurable, it's chronic, there was lots of negative narrative around having MS. And in my practice, I started observing, and I practice up and down the East Coast in multiple institutions. And the one identifying thing I started to observe in my patient populations is that the outliers and the people who were doing really well, regardless of what disease-modifying therapy they were on, I started to find what's the red string, like what's the connecting string with these folks who seem to be really doing well. And these were people who, in retrospect, maybe we would have identified them as benign MS, right? But prospectively, I was noticing that their disease was well tolerated, or at least in their perception, it was well tolerated. But it was more attitudinal than physical. And what I started to notice was their mindset. And the people who did much better physically, even on objective assessments, was the way they carried their energy and the way they behaved towards the disease. They almost found an acceptance and surrender to it, not in defeat, but really in reconciliation. And there was almost, can you, louder? Sorry, yeah.
It doesn't disturb other people. I just can't.
Can hear. Is that too loud or is that okay? Perfect, okay. But what I observed was almost a reconciliation, right? And not embrace per se, but just a peaceful acceptance and looking for things that were positive. And you think like, well, that seems incredibly counterintuitive. Like what positive could be coming from having been diagnosed with an incurable chronic condition that I, at the time, only had shots that we could provide, right? And I remember one woman who struck me, and she was really kind of the instigator and the ignition for my purposeful observation. And she was 28, high power, young attorney, gunning to become a partner in her firm, was working like 100 hours a week. And she really wanted to act, but to satisfy her parents' expectations of their definition of success. She became an overachiever and wore that mask of, I'm going to be the best lawyer I can be, right? in the meanwhile suppressing her own voice and passion, but she was able to litigate so she could at least act and perform in the courtroom. When she was diagnosed with MS, I remember she had almost like a relief. And the second and third time she came back, and I would see her after diagnosis and do the whole explanation process of disease-modifying therapies. And I said, God, you seem like there's been a shift. There was like a palpable shift in her energy. And I said, what's different? And she said, I'm coming to realize I'm actually really grateful. And I thought, she said, I'm grateful because at 28 years old, I've realized now what's really important in my life. And although I love my parents and I know they love me, I really have always wanted to act. And now I realize I've just gotten the license to make every day count. And so she was able kind of to transmute her pain and her prejudice into something really powerful for her. And over the 2 years that I continued to support her journey in MS, she actually started acting and was able to earn a living as a character actor on SUV, whatever that is, Law and Order. And so she was happy, and that lightness of her being started to transcend through her physical body. And she was young and she had a lot of great prognostic indicators. And this is one example of an outlier. But it sparked my curiosity, and I started to observe, what is resilience really, and what does that look like? And so at the time, Brene Brown was starting at UT Southwestern and looking at positive psychology, and Martin Seligman was at University of Pennsylvania, and he's a positive psychologist. And there was a gentleman, Sean Aker, who's up at Harvard, who ended up writing The Happiness Advantage. And they all kind of look at resilience from different psychological perspectives and platforms. But if you look in the dictionary about what is resilience, it is the idea to respond to a compressive, transformative state without it diminishing your value, volume, or ability, right? And so it's taking kind of energy. If you think of, we're all at a very molecular level, cellular level. We're electrically charged, ions and cations and protons and neutrons, right? We have a frequency and a vibration that we put into the world, right? And so you can shift that either up or down. High frequency is open, it's light, it's fast. Low frequency, it's dense, it's slow, right? And so positivity and gratitude actually has been shown through quantum mechanics and research to have very high vibration, very high frequency. And so when you start pulling that type of positivity into your life through things like gratitude, your brain will actually, we'll talk about this later, your brain will start to scan for positive in your life. And it's magnetic, right? So in terms of adaptation, and Darwin is often misquoted as saying, the strongest survive. That's actually not what he said. He said the most adaptable survive. So whatever it is that is being put at you or you're confronted by, it's, do you confront it with resistance, or do you accept it, surrender to it, and alchemize it and figure out a way to transmute that into something more powerful, right? And that's really what we look at with resilience. And so in terms of neurologically, if you think of the brain and the brain development, so when we're babies, we come in with our primitive brain, okay? All of the autonomic nervous system is intact, so we can breathe on our own. Our heart beats on its own. Our enteric system behaves on its own, right? We regulate our sleep, our bowels, our breathing. All of that is regulated and automated for us when we come through the gates, right? As you are growing through your infant and toddler years, your kind of mammalian brain, the amygdala, the hippocampus, starts to form. That regulates your emotions and your memory imprint. And then the neocortex, the frontal lobe, the higher cortex, higher aspects of the brain, which we call the human brain, really reach maturation at 25, okay? And when we're confronted by something very threatening, we immediately get pushed into our primal brain, the predator-prey, fight, flight, or freeze for survival, right? And it's only through mechanisms by which we can fully control, once you realize how to disengage that automaticity, right? Because you automatically we're wired to respond genetically in one way or the other. If you talk to family members or friends, genetically you can see people have a predisposition towards when they're confronted with threat, they either fight, flee, or freeze, right? You actually have an ability to override those genetic imprints, right? But it's getting out of that primitive brain into the higher brain. And I'll tell you how to do that, all right? So part of the talk is also you walking away with how to manipulate, maneuver, and optimize your mind-body connection, right? Because you're a whole being. Even though if you're living with MS, we completely subspecialize and segment you and compartmentalize you and just look at your brain and your spinal cord and your optic nerves, we know you're actually a whole person in totality, living in a whole world, in a whole system, family, friends, community, universe, right? So how to dial in and then how to zoom out, right? We're going to double click into some of this and then we're going to swipe right, all right? So in terms of that mind-body connection, the immune system, interestingly, is highly regulated, interestingly, by emotions. And we're identifying this through newer research when we look at functional MRI and looking at people to, put them through a functional MRI and see what areas of their brain light up when we show them different pictures or talk to them about different scenarios that elicit certain emotions, right? We can actually see. So your thoughts activate different areas of your brain. So if that's the case, if you control what you're thinking, you can control what areas of your brain are activated. And then you can control how you behave or respond. And how you respond or behave, that output is the energy that it gets reflected back to you. Right? It's magnetic. Right? So they say if you talk to people who are very spiritual, they'll tell you like karma, right? Like the energy you put into the world is brought back to you, right? Wasn't it, the physicists that'll say for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, right? It's all connected. So when we think of the mind, and people say, well, what actually is the mind? It's, how is that different from the brain? This is taken from Dan Siegel, who's a physician at UCLA. He runs the MindSight Institute, and he's the father of interpersonal neurobiology. And his whole premise is really that interconnectedness, not only within ourselves, but to each other and the greater community. And so the mind is really the subjective experience of your world, right? Your perception, right? If you witness a car accident in a 4-lane or 4-street intersection, and you have witnesses from every street that observed that accident, you're going to get very different perspectives depending on where you were standing and observing, right? And so it's that process of being conscious and aware. And it's also that process that really regulates the flow of energy in terms of information we receive, process, and information we output. And that's all consciousness, right? There's also the subconsciousness, which is harder to tap into, but you can actually learn to identify and regulate that as well. It takes more work than the consciousness. It really takes time and energy and delving into kind of, you may have heard it called like your shadow self or your subconscious mind, but psychologists often, when you see the cartoon of the man on the couch and he's hypnotized, they're trying to get into that subconscious mind. Like, why do I choose things without thinking? Why do I say things without thinking? Right? That's the subconscious mind. So mental activities and consciousness really include what do we hold as beliefs, attitudes? What is the mood? How many of you believe you have power over your mood or can control your mood? Right? Some days you feel like you might not, right? It's usually when all of the other reserves are empty. You're tired, you're hungry, right? You're angry, you haven't had enough hugs, right? By the way, just as an interesting immune side, 8 hugs a day to maintain homeostasis within your immune system. A 2-minute hug releases norepinephrine, serotonin, oxytocin, all of the neurotransmitters we try to regulate through prescriptive therapies. Not saying they're more effective because we haven't done head-to-head studies, but I'll tell you it's very effective if you need to regulate yourself. If you're in a state where you're emotionally dysregulated or upset, someone you trust and love hugging you for 2 minutes and synchronizing your breathing with you regulates not only your immune system, but your central nervous system. So if you've had babies in your life, if you're a parent, we were taught skin to skin with our babies. It's the same idea, okay? We never grow out of needing skin to skin, by the way. We never grow out of that, right? So this is interesting. This is from a friend of mine who's an Oriental practitioner, Oriental medicine practitioner. And in Oriental medicine, they use meridians, energy meridians. And in Ayurvedic medicine, they use chakras. But it's this idea of energy transmission and regulation through the body. And in Western medicine, we identify that chronic stress does, in fact, activate the hypothalamic pituitary axis, which is kind of the main hard drive for your endocrine system and all of your hormones, okay? Which also in turn affect your neurotransmitters, which in turn affect your central nervous system, your peripheral nervous system, your autonomic nervous system, right? It becomes all connected. And so what we've identified with prolonged stress, we see an overstimulation of those inflammatory cytokines, which activate all types of interleukin in our body, which are inflammatory signals to our cells, right? So in an autoimmune chronic condition, whether it's MS or any other autoimmune condition, you may have a genetic predisposition, right? But there was some activation of inflammation chronically that supported a manifestation of that physical dis-ease in your body, right? And it's funny, when I talk to my patients, when I was in practice, I would ask them, if you think back 6 to 12 months before you were diagnosed, can you identify any aggravating incident, any stressful thing in your life that occurred? And interestingly, a majority of my patients had some major life disruptions: divorce, death, a change in career, they moved. There were some things that were stressful to them and usually lasted more than 6 weeks. It's interesting. And again, it may not be true for you, but it's of interest. So here we have the hypothalamic axis and the stress response. And this is just basic physiology. So the HPA axis regulates cortisol, so our body's natural steroid, and our immune responses. And too much steroid, as you probably have assessed and learned through having MS, can have great anti-inflammatory effects initially, and then over time can start to have some deleterious side effects, right? So chronic cortisol activation can lead to adrenal suppression. And the adrenals sit on top of your kidneys and help to regulate your blood pressure, right? So that's when you see stress, and Herbert Benson up at Harvard did a lot of this mind-body connection and breathing connection. He's one of the first Western physicians to look at being able to take deep breaths and do box breathing to lower our heart rate, lower our blood pressure, because you're activating the suppressive effects of the hypothalamic pituitary axis, right? So we have the medulla also, which is in the lower part of the brainstem, and the vagal nerve, the 10th cranial nerve, runs through this entire highway. Interestingly, it connects your brain, your heart, innervates your brain, your heart, and your gut. And when we think about those three entities, How many of you have had a gut instinct? How many have had your heart broken? How many have been so stressed you can't think straight? Yeah. So there's some theory about vagal tone. And interestingly, humming and singing tend to improve vagal tone. And it's very interesting when you look at Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. People who have very damaged short-term memory or memory issues, they can still remember lyrics to music, right? So Renee Fleming is doing some amazing work with neurologists right now looking at singing and its ability to heal. And it's really because of that vagal nerve tone improvement. And so one of the easy, I'm going to give you a quick biohack, is that if you're upset, if you're stressed, and you need a quick regulation, one of the best things that you can do is take a deep breath all the way to the bottom of your belly, and you just, right? And you let it out, and you really let it out. You might want to be in a private area to do this, but you know, it's that roar, if you will, right? And it's that primal release of that stress. And if you do that 5 times, you almost feel like you could faint because you don't realize how much we hold our breath when we are stressed, right? But there are 40,000 neurites that have been identified in the heart. So what you think affects the feelings of your heart. And we all know when we're really stressed, your gut will respond in one way or another, right? The gut microbiome actually is probably the largest immune organ that's been identified. It's all connected. Okay, so in terms of looking at neuroinflammation, whether it's peripheral or central in autoimmune, we know that inflammation really can lead to disruptive manifestations of physical symptoms. And I think probably uniformly, we know folks who live with MS, when you ask them what's the most debilitating symptom they have, about 95% of people are going to say fatigue, right? Another 80% will say my thinking. Sometimes I don't feel like I'm thinking clearly. My short-term memory is challenged. I have trouble with word retrieval, right? Then you add on menopause and menopause, because men, you're not immune, unfortunately, to hormonal changes as we age. We all get a little foggier, right? And so we see chronic inflammations and conditions actually that are really interesting. Now I'm working in peripheral nerve autoimmune conditions. And we actually see fatigue and cognitive issue challenges also in peripheral autoimmune conditions. And so I'm seeing a lot of linkages in terms of behaviors and manifestation of physical symptoms between the entities, although physiologically they're not necessarily related. But we'd certainly see that driver, that parallel driver in things like MS, rheumatoid arthritis, neuromyelitis optica, autoimmune encephalitis. And interestingly, behaviorally, when we talk about obesity has now been identified as one of the largest inflammatory organs that is derived when we overeat. And a lot of people, when you reach obesity, there is a genetic predisposition to that disease. But many people are activated by their emotions, and they end up eating their emotions, right? So we can see inflammation, and there's research to support this immune dysfunction is really mediated by specific cytokines. And interestingly, IL-1, IL-6, and 17 have also been identified as disruptive markers in MS, right? So I thought that was interesting to pull out. Okay, so when we talk about coherence and integration in medicine, it's really that resonance of like, let's identify where we can connect the dots. And as I've kind of illustrated, there are many places to see the connections, right? So when we integrate kind of the prefrontal cortex, which again is that neocortex, that higher brain executive function thinking of logic and reasoning, and the limbic system, which is really the hypothalamus and the amygdala, the memory and the emotional component, kind of that mammalian brain, when we can connect those two, we can kind of restore the autonomic nervous system, which is the parasympathetics and the sympathetics. And so, I teach my kids, like, mommy's about to flip her lid. And what I mean by that is if you think of your brain as a fist, this is your brainstem, this is the lizard brain, right? It's what we all come in automated with. This is the mammalian brain. Have you met most animals and children are highly intuitive, right? If a dog is not comfortable with you, you kind of go, what's going on in my energy field, right? Because they sense things. This is the sensing brain, right? You have an energy. Before you walk in a room, someone senses your mood, right? It's the way we carry ourselves, carry our energy. And then the top of the brain is the neocortex, the thinking brain, the logical brain, the human brain. So what happens when we get confronted by threat? Oh my God, we get out of our thinking brain and we react, either emotionally or potentially physically by running away or fighting, right? Or just completely freezing and not knowing what to do, right? So that idea of integration is being mindful and staying in our higher brain before we flip our lid, okay? So how many of you have heard the term epigenetics? It's not a new term. It's a newer, reintroduced concept. But it's really the study of environmental influences and activations or suppressions of genetic codes. And so it's genes we used to think are fixed. Like the DNA you come with is the DNA you leave with. But in fact, we're starting to identify that there are modifiable influences that don't necessarily change the code of your genes when we look at the human genome, but we can change whether that they become activated and expressed or not. And that's really powerful because it gives you back some autonomy and some ability to navigate your journeys with any chronic condition. Okay? And so lifestyle choices alter gene expression, right? And so I always think in a therapeutic relationship, any relationship really, it has to be a mutual benefit for both parties, right? And historically, you'd come to your healthcare provider, they'd tell you what to do and expect you to do it, and then you go home, right? Hopefully those days are gone. Hopefully we recognize that by providing you information and then allowing it to be your choice what you choose to do with that information. And if you choose to modify a behavior, it's mediated really because of internally, that's something you desire and your intention is to do something for yourself. That adherence is significantly impactful when it comes to success or failure with changes in behavior, right? I can tell you to not smoke all day long, but if I don't tell you why you shouldn't smoke and what would be benefits of not smoking and give you the say, like, it's your choice. This is the information. I'd like to see you do well, but you choose. Every day, nobody likes being told what to do. We didn't like it when we were kids. We don't like it as adults, right? So delving into kind of if you think about disconnecting everything for a moment, although it's all connected, but breaking it down and kind of double clicking. We have in our mind, we have feelings, thoughts, behaviors. Feelings we don't really have control over. That's the one thing that just kind of comes to us based on a whole collection of your experiences to date, right? You get triggered, something bothers, something is said to you in a certain way, in a certain tone, with a certain expression, you feel yourself respond to that, right? But the interesting thing is when you look physiologically at feelings, although they are not something you can control, they are fleeting. If you allow yourself to sit with whatever feeling is arising within you and don't resist it, but allow it to pass through you, that chemical response lasts 90 seconds. And I think for me, finding that out gave me first of all, it gave me a lot of relief. Like, oh, good, this is not going to be forever in perpetuity that I'm going to feel this way. It's not good. But it also reminds me that, oh, I have more power. Even though the feeling might not be something I can control, I can control if I allow myself to sit with it and ultimately accept it and learn from it, or if I resist it, suppress it, push it down, and inevitably it's going to show up again, right? So there's a lovely acronym called RAIN, and it's recognize, acknowledge, investigate, and nurture. And the idea is we get to a place of acceptance, because we can assign negative or positive value to feelings. They're really neutral. It's how we determine, we choose to look at them, right? So if you recognize, like, oh, like somebody said something offensive to me. Oh, that didn't feel good. Well, let me acknowledge that didn't feel good. Let me investigate, why didn't that feel good, right? And more times, did your mom ever teach you pointing your finger is really, it's 3 fingers back at you, so like look at yourself first. So why does that make me feel that way? What within my experience is being triggered or activated or reminded of something? And relationally, we all come in this world with 2 basic needs: to feel significant and feel like we belong. And those are early attachment styles that we get from parents or the adults in our life when we are little, from the ages of 0 to 5. And not to be Freudian and say, oh, everything is your mother's fault, because I'm a mom. But, sometimes if you just investigate, like, where is this coming from? Without judgment, right, of yourself or others, then whatever you realize where it is coming from, now you can say, well, I'm an adult now. And whatever that was bothersome to me, whether it was from my childhood or from whatever, I now can take care of myself, right? I can be either the adult that the little person in me needed, or I can be the adult who has my back now. I can be my own bestie, right? Moving into thoughts, so the science of hope and optimism, we really have the ability to pause, right? And there's the acronym STOP, which is, to stop, to think about what you're feeling, and then pause before you proceed, right? So like the O is like optimize thinking, optimize the time, and then proceed. And so it's the idea that, again, we have control over our thoughts. Feelings can't control. They last 90 seconds, they pass through us. Our thoughts, we absolutely can control. And as I remind my middle schoolers, and your behaviors is what you're going to be accountable for. So that's very important to regulate those behaviors, right? So it's also that ability that in that pause, we have a moment, an opportunity to reframe, right? So when I lost my hard drive and I truly went into like a panic, I had this like, this is due to, like, I got to get this to her tomorrow, and I now have nothing. And I've been working on this for weeks. I had to do that whole exercise myself of like, okay, just take a deep breath. Like, this information. You have this information in other places. Maybe it's an opportunity to improve the talk, right? I had to really work and walk myself through those feelings and then the thoughts. And then what am I going to do to solution here, right? So the behaviors is really, how do we rewire, right? Neurons that wire together, fire together. And we have the ability to manipulate that through our thoughts, right? If you wake up in the morning and you start your day with oh, everything hurts. Oh, why do I have to be here today? Oh, oh, it's raining outside, right? And just like pessimistic. Now you've set yourself up for your thoughts to now be harnessed into that negative thinking. And I want you to do this as one of our exercises, not now, but we'll talk about it, is if you think of 5 things you're grateful for before your feet hit the floor, you actually start to rewire neural networks and improve your clinical reserve, your brain reserve. And we actually now know that we don't stop our brain maturation at age 25. We can continue to improve our ability to rewire and circumnavigate lesions, strokes other things, tumors, through our thoughts and thinking. It's not to say rely on that fully, but we have the ability to optimize. It's kind of like updating your software, right? Upgrading. So neuroplasticity, again, is the brain's ability to power up, right? To optimize, to upgrade your software. And attention is really the process, and it's attending to your thoughts and really being good housekeepers and good cleaning of your thoughts, washing them through something positive. And it takes exercise, right? This doesn't necessarily come, unless you're naturally an optimistic person, and there are Pollyannas that exist. You kind of have to exercise this. And it's a skill, like any muscle. The more you exercise it, the stronger it becomes. So it helps to groove new pathways and the mindfulness. So the reticular activating system is a really cool part of the brain, which I really love. And I've been playing with this in my own life, kind of seeing like, can I biohack, if you will. And so things like intermittent fasting can help improve your brain's ability to rewire. When we sleep, it is our body's time to do the most restoration and repair. And so if you are on an empty stomach, more energy and metabolism goes towards that sweeping out of debris and cleaning the grooves, right? And so giving yourself 1 to 2 days of fasting, and that doesn't mean, it just means no food. Ideally, drinking lots of water, maybe it's doing a green juice or teas, but not eating solid foods. And you can do that for anywhere from 2 to 12, 24 hours, depending, but I wouldn't recommend it out of the gate 24 hours. Practicing gratitude, I told you about the morning exercises. One of the sheets I gave you is also a whole list if you're struggling with what am I grateful for today. Scanning for the positive, okay? The binaural beats, is anybody familiar with binaural beats? Robert Monroe, who's a scientist in the 60s, identified using frequencies, and he really, you'll hear New Age folks talk about like your energy, and they put crystals on and channel your vibration. I don't discount that because if you look at quantum physics, Einstein also talked about the same things, just in a more scientific way. But binaural beats, like if you look at different frequencies, and you can actually now on Apple Music. When I'm doing work, I'll do 40 megahertz, which is a deep focus. And I do find, like my son who's neurodivergent, if I put that on for him, he's able to focus better. But there's different frequencies, and you guys can look this up on the internet, different frequencies to help with different things. Like if you're experiencing pain, or if you're looking to do mindfulness or meditation, you can look up these different frequencies. And singing and humming, and how Renee Fleming talks about this too, in that, when she's soprano, and at different notes, that she feels different things in her body, right? And when you have patients who are compromised because of stroke or Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, when they sing, they're actually activating and firing on functional MRI different areas of the brain. A proper sleep hygiene, and looking at focused attention and meditation. These are all ways to improve that kind of software update that we have integrated in the RAS, or the reticular activating system. So here's the big thing, is controlling the controllables, right? How many of you, when you were diagnosed, felt like you had no control, or you were afraid because there was so much uncertainty of what's next?
Yeah, in the beginning.
Yeah. MS, I used to think, is like an analogy for life, right? Because I don't know, when I leave here, my intention is to go home and spend the weekend with my kids. But life gets lifey sometimes, and it happens without our control. So where can I control the controllables, right? So we can control the nutrition we choose. We can control how much we move to our capacity and our capability, how much hydration that we're mindful of. What does our sleep hygiene look like, right? Are we turning off the screens 2 hours before bedtime? Are we in a nice, cool, cold, dark environment when we go to sleep? We optimized our sleep architecture, making sure we don't have sleep apneas. Then we have our social networks, who you choose to surround yourself with, right? I'm telling my son right now, who's 12, buddy, you're one friend away from a disaster. who you choose to have around you, you share their energy, right? And you should always be, never be the smartest person in the room, right? Purpose-driven living. Does anybody here volunteer? Yeah. So I highly encourage you, if you have the time, space, the bandwidth, consider your gifts, consider your skills, consider what you can contribute to somebody else. The purpose-driven life is probably one of the more therapeutic activities we can engage in. And it doesn't have to be hours a week. It can be 1 hour once a month. But the idea that you're contributing something to someone else really does make a big difference in your whole outlook and your mindset and your perspective, right? Helps with that cognitive reframing. The breathing is really central and key in terms of being able to regulate the parasympathetic response, so that, deep breaths, if you do box breathing, so inhale over the count of 4, hold for the count of 4, exhale for the count of 4, hold for the count of 4, then go back into your inhale. So that's what we call box breath. That helps to activate the parasympathetic response, brings you into a rest and digest, gets you out of your amygdala hijack if you are confronted by something emotionally dysregulating, okay? So the idea is to bring you back into the present. The other thing you can do that is another biohack is if you find yourself having trouble focusing, is do intermittent snapping. That motor-mind connection kind of brings you back. The other thing you can do is tongue slapping. If you want to put 3 things together, do this privately. But I tell my kids, go in your room, take a minute, but you do your big, deep breath, your roar exhale, your finger snapping, and your tongue clicking. You look like an idiot, but I tell you, you'll feel so much better, right? It's giving yourself a moment. I'm going to run through these quickly for the sake of time because we've touched on a lot of them. But in terms of nutrition, we know certain foods activate inflammation and certain foods don't, or actually suppress inflammation. So ultra-high processed foods are things that ideally we navigate away from. Inflammation also we see with high sodium and high sugar content foods. And the less agronomous we are as a society, the more processed our foods become. And so the Mediterranean diet, when you look at the blue zones, I don't know if any of you are familiar with the blue zones, they're places that have been identified all over the world where people have longevity. And also, interestingly, they also are purpose-driven, these communities that have longevity. They walk most of their places. They eat foods that are from the ground, from the trees, or from natural sources. And their animal sources, they keep to a minimum with mostly fish, fruits and vegetables. But the things, really do come into play in terms of the gut microbiome. And remember, the gut microbiome is an enormous immune organ. And we see things like leaky gut associated with MS, okay? Exercise, and this can be things like Tai Chi, it could be yoga, even deep breathing increases your metabolic reserve. You can burn about 30 calories just by doing breathing exercises, right? Every day we're walking and breathing, we're burning calories. So it doesn't mean you have to go to a gym, it doesn't mean you have to get on a treadmill, it doesn't mean you have to sweat. It just means we want you to move to your ability and capacity to move every day. And hydration and cellular communication. Most of the times when we are dehydrated, we cannot thermoregulate. So your ability to regulate your internal temperature, and those of you who have MS, you know heat is not our friend, right? Heat will create UTOS phenomena, make all of the neurological symptoms worse. It's not really a real relapse, it's more of a pseudo-relapse, but keeping yourself well hydrated will maintain that homeostasis and internal thermoregulation. In terms of sleep hygiene, we talked about that, but it does, we see less brain atrophy in people who have normal sleep architectures and less inflammation throughout the body. Sleep is the very best medicine we possibly could employ in any condition, be it healthy or otherwise. In terms of mindfulness and breathing, are any of you familiar with apps, like mindfulness apps? There's Open, there's Mind, there's Interconnection. But I recommend you take, if you're open to it, is take yourself through a guided meditation. Usually they're like 8 to 12 minutes, but I do it in the morning when I'm having coffee in bed, right? I do my gratitude list, I'll do my mindfulness, and it just kind of sets your intention for the day. But it also brings you into that kind of restful state, not sleepy, but just restful, that you're ready to respond. You're kind of filling your cup, if you will, and your internal reserves to be able to respond and not react to whatever's coming your way throughout the day. And as I said before, life gets lifey, and there are many things that are out of our control. So these are kind of the things that we have, the epigenetics that we have full control over, which really do influence that activation or suppression of what our genetic codes are, right? Okay, I want to spend a little bit more time on gratitude and daily resilience. So you received a sheet that has, I think, about 25 things that you can't control. But I would encourage you at some time today, when you're leaving here later today, is just sit in silence for a couple of moments and think of the 5 things you're grateful for, right? And it doesn't have to be poetic or long. I will tell you, today I said I was grateful that I got out of bed this morning, that I woke up today. I was grateful that my children are healthy and they slept in nice warm beds last night, that we have a roof over our head, we had food in our bellies last night, and that I get to do what I love to do, right? I was coming here today and I get to do something I love, right? It doesn't have to be, abundance doesn't have to be material. Abundance is the things that we're grateful for, however you choose to see that, right? And when you start your day with a mindset of abundance, that I am blessed beyond my imagination, that continues to magnetize throughout your day. You ever notice how laughing is infectious? Right? There's a really good reel on Instagram of a gentleman watching a video on a bus, and he is giggling, and he's not aware of anybody around him. And everybody else, you saw this, and they kind of laugh because he's like socially a little awkward because he's so into this. He's dialed in, and he's giggling. And then you see one by one, everyone start to giggle, and then they giggle at each other, giggling at him, and they're not giggling at his expense in a intentional, and not in a malicious way, but in a joyful way. And it's such a positive energy that's radiating and resonating with everybody. And so I know we live in New York. I know we're here, and it's like the most serious city. But I promise you, if you smile at 10 people today, you will probably have at least 8 people smile back at you. It changes just small, meaningful impacts, right? So your voice commands your body and your spirit and your energy. And since I don't know when my last day is on this path, I choose to make it hopefully impactful for myself and others. And so what I would encourage you to consider, I challenge you to consider, is whatever is happening around you, within you, behind you, in front of you, is to choose through a mindful, positive energy. Who am I in the face of this? And this is taken from Viktor Frankl, who was an Austrian neurologist, psychologist, who was in a concentration camp, lost all of his family and his friends, and wrote Man's Search for the Meaning of Life, which is an incredible tome. It's a very dense tome. If you are up to reading it, you probably will have to put it down because the atrocities he describes are kind of unimaginable. But what I take from that book is that he said, we can have everything stripped from us, every dignity. But what they can never take from you is your choice of how you respond to it. And so if you think about all of the life's wisdom that you've accumulated to this point and expertise that you have, how do you employ that to have positive impact in your own life, but ideally in others? And then I'll leave you with this. Ram Dass is a famous philosopher, and he has one of my favorite quotes is that we're all souls here walking a path, walking each other home, right? And so our intersections, connections may influence or change our trajectories of our path along the way. But at the end of the day, we're here for such a short period of time. Be grateful for all of it. The good, the whatever may have been bad. And as I take it back to the patient that I had the privilege to care for, who said to me, I'm grateful. Right? Thank you. Thank you.